Back with the High Court in Tshwane ruling that provisions of the National Health Act, as it is currently constituted, that require a doctor to produce a certificate of need before being allowed to practice in a particular area are unconstitutional. The Health Department had argued that the act was an attempt to spread doctors around the country. Essentially, at the moment, doctors tend to congregate in middle-class areas. In other words, some areas of the country have large numbers of doctors, some have none. This decision, though, could have a huge impact on government's ability to implement the NHI, because it would mean government doesn't have the power to force doctors or hospitals to work in particular areas, or maybe even to join the NHI. Anton Van der Bijl is the Deputy Chief Executive of Trade Union Solidarity. Anton, good afternoon to you. Why did you take this issue to court?
Well, Stephen, at the end of the day, we saw with the NHI that there's a push from government to centralize the health sector in South Africa. So, yeah, we looked at the current Health Act and we saw that Section 36 to 40 of that specific act clearly also is allocated or has the specific purpose of centralizing human capital in South Africa. So the very purpose of that section is for the minister to say, I don't want certain doctors to practice for example, in Pretoria, but in Kukenhaap. We saw that and we decided that this cannot be constitutional. And yeah, yesterday we have been vindicated by the court. So yeah, at the end of the day, I know it's an act that has been in place from 2005. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's deemed unconstitutional, and therefore we took the matter to court.
I presume you relied on the constitutional provision that someone has a right to practice their profession. A doctor is practicing a profession. They should be allowed to practice it wherever they want. Is that the argument?
Yeah, in essence, that's the argument. Also the freedom of association, as well as my right and the public to decide which doctor they want to see. But yeah, at the end of the day, to boil it down, the argument is I study for 7 years to become a doctor. I have certain personal interests. I have possibly family in Pretoria. And then it's not up to a minister which sits somewhere in office to decide, no, you cannot practice in Pretoria. We want you in Kukenhaap. It's up to the government to decide in Upington or Kukenhaap or any rural town. They must build clinics, they must build hospitals, and they must make it worthwhile for doctors to go to Kukenhaap. But they are not interested in that. They want to see a quick solution by the private sector, and we say that cannot happen. So,
okay. So, Anton, I mean, I hear your argument. I mean, the argument from government would be, and I think this is true, if you go into the Rosebank area of Johannesburg, the Sandton area of Johannesburg, you will find doctor after doctor after practice after doctor. If you go into Umlazi, if you go into most township areas, you'll see far fewer doctors. The point is that we have doctors concentrated in rich areas and no doctors in poor areas, and government wants to address that. That was the intention. I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, it is a legitimate aim of government, isn't it, to make healthcare more equitable?
No, we cannot disagree with the fact that good healthcare must be universally available in South Africa. That's a good argument, and most certainly we cannot disagree with that. But the fact remains is, if you look at pure economics, then supply and demand would say that there is a supply and a demand, or demand in, let's say, Rosebank. Otherwise, I would not open a practice. If there's a demand and it's favorable for me to practice in, let's say, for example, in rural areas, then it's up to government to make sure it's favorable and there's some pull factors for doctors to go to Upington. It's for them to decide, no, you can open a practice in Upington irrespective of the fact whether you have patients or not. We hope that you get patients, but if there is no patients, we don't worry about that. That the government cannot do, and that's what they intend to do. They do not say, no, we will subsidize you to go to Upington to open a practice there. They only tell you, you will not get a certificate of need to practice in Pretoria. You must go to Upington, that's that. We say that's another argument, and that's the argument that the court decided was unconstitutional.
In your interpretation, what does it mean then for the NHI? Does it almost stop the NHI in your interpretation?
Well, if you look at both these acts, let's say Section 36 to 40 of the National Health Act, the specific certificate of need, and you look at the National Health Insurance Act or the NHI Act, then the purpose of both of them is to centralize the powers and the sector within the Department of Health. So the Section 36, the Certificate of Needs, centralizes human capital in the sense that the department can decide where you can practice or where you can, by implicitly, where you cannot practice. And then the finances are centralized by means of the NHI Act. So both of them is pillars of centralization of the government. We say if you knock down one of the pillars, as we have done through the Certificate of Need court case and the judgment that we received yesterday, then the same would apply, the very same arguments would apply to the NHI, and the outcome or the consequences thereof would be also unconstitutional NHI Act.
A lot's still going to happen over this, it seems to me. I mean, I suspect that there will be an appeal. I think the Health Minister will probably give an indication on that. He's due to, I think, be on this channel later in the evening. And I suspect also that the debate in our society around the NHI isn't over yet. The Democratic Alliance seemed to agree with you that it was going to go to court to fight the NHI. It's now in a coalition government with the ANC. It seemed last week that the DA and the ANC both seemed to suggest that they could just come to some kind of agreement. Do you think you might be left on your own in this argument?
I don't foresee that. If the NHI Act in its totality goes ahead, then I assume each and every South African who has a health insurance must oppose this application. Well, every citizen in South Africa must oppose that. But yeah, we see on the one hand the president respectfully says he's going to engage with parties, but on the other hand, he opposes our court application vehemently. So yeah, it's a bit ironical, but at the end of the day, we must do what we must do. We don't agree with the NHI. We agree that there must be good universal health care, irrespective of where you are in South Africa. But we say that's a duty on the government, and they do not comply with that duty. And if that's the argument of the NHI, we'll continue to fight that, irrespective of whether we are alone or we have partners in that fight. But we will go ahead with that fight.
Anton Van der Bijl, thank you, Deputy Chief Executive at Solidarity. Really do appreciate the time.